Let's move on to our next panel discussion of the impact of the conflict in Ukraine in the Eastern Mediterranean. This discussion is co-organized with the Center of European and International Affairs. Please welcome Andreas Theophanous, Head of the Department of Politics and Governance at the University of Nicosia, and President of the Cyprus Center for European and International Affairs. Ambassador Matthew Bryza, Board Member, Jamestown Foundation. The panel will be moderated by Evie Mitsidou Phillips, who is the Assistant Editor-in-Chief at the Cyprus News Agency. Evie, gentlemen, welcome. Sure. The floor is yours.
Oh, I don't want to be so far away.
Sorry.
Yeah, we stay close.
I thought she would take that.
It's okay.
So, first of all, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Both esteemed speakers and very knowledgeable on the subject matter. So time is our enemy and our ally. Our enemy because we have to be short and concise, but our ally for precisely the same reasons. So we're not going to bore the audience. We're going to have an intervention first from Mr. Theophanous. You may begin.
Thank you very much. I thank the organizers for this invitation, which gives us the opportunity to share some views on the impact of the war in Ukraine in the Eastern Mediterranean. First of all, I would say that events following the Russian invasion are such that are leading to tectonic changes in the international system. In relation to Europe, unfortunately, this situation is leading to a climate of less security, less prosperity, and more instability. I have no doubt that this war could have been prevented. Now coming to the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey has continued to pursue relations with all parties involved in the conflict, despite the strong anti-Russian stance of the West, including sanctions. Greece chose to further strengthen relations with the United States, and there was a serious deterioration of relations with Moscow. Cyprus has followed the EU sanctions and overall policy. Consequently, the traditional relations with Russia have been strained. Furthermore, we had the embargo against Cyprus by the United States. The arms embargo has been lifted under certain conditions. That's another development. Now, following these developments, certainly the United States and the European Union would like to see the utilization of the energy resources in the Eastern Mediterranean for regional use and for European use as well. The US would also be interested to see the reduction of the energy dependence of Turkey on Russia. Now, Erdogan, for this, certainly there must be developments in the Eastern Mediterranean which could facilitate such a state of affairs. Now, Erdogan supports the territorial integrity of Ukraine, yet in the case of Cyprus, his policy is quite the opposite. He calls for a two-state solution. That could mean confederation and so on. Now, given the new set of arrangements, can we expect new efforts for the solution of the Cyprus problem and the Greco-Turkish issues? I think it is difficult, but not impossible. In 2023, we have elections in Cyprus, Greece, and Turkey. So one could expect some meaningful developments, if any, after the elections. Now, the issue is that it's important in the meantime to try to avoid or de-escalate tensions which may be dangerous. It is essential to avoid excesses in the Aegean and in Cyprus. It's important to work in ways which prevent tensions and the escalation of conflict. I would say it is unfortunate that there is little restraint to both the rhetoric and the actions of Turkey. Now, assuming that there will be no conflicts, and after the elections in the three countries, what one could expect? Certainly a solution to the Cyprus problem would create a lot of opportunities in relation to energy issues and so on, but given the great gap in the positions of the two sides, it will be difficult now. So what do we do? I think it is time to think of an evolutionary process to addressing issues, including the Cyprus question, and including the energy utilization. What could such steps include? I think if we have a de facto delimitation of the exclusive economic zone between Turkey and Cyprus, I think we could have energy developments and the utilization of energy with benefits of all parties involved. At the same time, such a package of an evolutionary process could address the issue of Russia, in line with the relevant resolutions of the United Nations, and also we could see some other calculated CBMs on the island. I think that positive developments in Cyprus in such a way could pave the way to easing of the tensions between Greece and Turkey, and also to advancing pragmatic solutions in this perspective as well. Now, understandably, for such steps to be pursued, the support of the United States, the European Union, and Britain would be indispensable. Now, coming back to the issue of Ukraine, I think what has happened and what is happening makes imperative the revisiting of the role of the United Nations. Furthermore, it is essential to see how we advance an atmosphere of respect for international law and also avoiding double standards. This also applies to the European Union. Such an approach would be useful to facilitate tensions in our area as well. Now, again, talking about double standards, I already mentioned that Erdogan is calling for the respect of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Now, nevertheless, in the case of Cyprus, a much smaller country, he has other ideas in mind.
Just another 30 seconds,
now,
please.
Coming to see the West has imposed very strict sanctions on Russia and is pressing this country. One could naturally raise the question, being in Cyprus, I cannot but have the temptation to raise the issue why such policy was never pursued against Turkey for its aggression in Cyprus. Instead, we had an arms embargo against Cyprus by the United States in the past. I think that it is essential to show statesmanship from all interested parties so that tensions are reduced, and also take some modest steps forward with mutual benefits in the broader area and the international environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Theophanous. Mr. Bryza.
Sure, thank you. I'm really happy to be back on this beautiful and unbelievably complex island, to be back with you, Andreas. You reminded me the last time we saw each other, I thought it was just 10 years ago. No, it was 20 years ago when I was working in the White House in the National Security Council. And at that point, for 4 years I was there, I had responsibility for Cyprus, Turkey, Greece, South Caucasus, Central Asia, and Caspian energy. And after that, I went back to the State Department, did the same thing for 4 years, implemented the messes, I guess I was trying to strategize about in the White House, and then I was ambassador to Azerbaijan, and I left 10 years ago. I'm now involved in private business, a lot of it focused on energy, and bringing non-Russian natural gas to Europe, and I live in Istanbul. So Turkey is front and center in my life. I chose to live there because my wife was born there and I had good family contacts. And I think that gives me not necessarily a view that's sympathetic to Turkey, but I have a lot of reasons to be critical, and I have great access to the very top of the system. So that's going to be my perspective here. Getting to the meat of the matter, the impact of the war. Let's face it, Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the Eastern Mediterranean. There are two major impacts. The second one, Turkey, I'll talk about second. Russia, obviously, is the one most influenced in the Eastern Mediterranean by the war. That's because Russia had its ambition in Syria to build upon its base in Tartus and have a permanent military standing in Syria and to effect the war, which meant to keep Assad in power and keep the Islamist extremists down. And that strategy is in a shambles now. Russia simply doesn't have the military capabilities to project its power here in the Eastern Mediterranean, and really not even in the South Caucasus, where it had nearly 2,000 peacekeepers on the ground after the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War. From my perspective, as the former US mediator of that conflict, they were doing a good job. but Putin has had to take the most capable ones and send them to the front in Ukraine. So it's the first big impact of the war in the Eastern Mediterranean is Russia's retraction. And then the second big one is Turkey's greater sense of purpose, put it that way. From your perspective, Andreas, and from the perspective here in Nicosia, it seems that Turkey is on the offensive. Based on my experience and my conversations today, but in the past, I think Turkey believes it is on the defensive. And it always phrases 1974, right, as defensive. As we were talking about backstage, in Turkey's mind, it was reacting to a crisis on the ground, all those events in '63. But as you remember, Andreas, the history began before that as well. But Turkey's thinking we're playing defense. Turkey's thinking number one goal in this is to end the war. Again, we were talking about that backstage, Andreas. If the war keeps going, it's a pretty scary situation, right? Because Putin's talking about elevating, you escalate to de-escalate a conflict. So you threaten to use violence at a level that your opponent is terrified of, which in this case would be so-called battlefield nuclear weapons. So you, as the conventional opponent, in this case Ukraine, give up. And you use that threat of nuclear weapons to intimidate then Ukraine's friends in the world, which means the West, including Turkey. That's not working. And the West is calling Putin's bluff. Nonetheless, I know my former colleagues in Washington now are seriously thinking about, God forbid, if he uses nuclear weapons, what do we do? How do we respond? And there's a whole gamut of things you can do. We can talk about that offline if you want. But the threat is being taken seriously, but is being viewed as a bluff. And everybody knows Putin said, I'm threatening to use all weapons. It's not a bluff. If you have to say it's not a bluff, it's probably a bluff. At least that's the attitude in Washington. So the war is going extremely poorly for Putin. Turkey's main goal is to de-escalate. So friends of mine in Washington and in Berlin are furious that Turkey has not chosen to join the sanctions regime, but also, I think, relieved that Erdogan has kept open a channel. Yes, as you were saying, Andreas, he's been unequivocal, he being Erdogan, in criticizing the invasion, in insisting on the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, which means giving Crimea back to Ukraine. He's been consistent in providing lethal weaponry to Ukraine. The TB2 drones are responsible for the deaths of a lot of Russian infantry and sailors because those drones played a big role in the sinking of the Black Sea Fleet's flagship, the Moskva. I know from my experience in the US government, when a country has provided weapons to a country that's unfriendly to the US that might use those weapons to kill US soldiers, that's considered a very serious problem and has led to sanctions in the past. There's one example I can think of. I was just in Kazakhstan this morning, and in Kazakhstan, about 15 years ago, we had a big crisis with them because they had provided certain weaponry to the North Koreans. Well, Turkey's provided these deadly weapons to Ukraine, yet Erdogan has done it without bombast, without closing doors with Moscow. So we see then that Turkey played the critical role in the brokering of the grain agreement, right, which allowed 25 million tons of grain in Ukraine to reach global markets and avert famine. And NATO Secretary General Guterres, granted the UN does need to be reformed, but he has thanked Turkey for this. He said this is a crucial bit of mediation. And I guess my final remark is I think Turkey's a bit naive, though, on how big of a role it can play as a mediator. Turkey is in the mode now of thinking, okay, we're big, we have NATO's second largest military, now we've shown on the world stage what we can do with the grain, now we're going to end this war through mediation. And I think what Putin has shown is, no, you're not. We're not going to end this war until I say I'm done fighting. And so in March, they were close, right, that they had a basic framework worked out. That framework is no longer valid because the fighting went on too long. Ukraine is now doing much better on the battlefield. So at some point, I think the Russian military is going to be exhausted. And at that point, the possibility of Turkish mediation will come back into play. And I think we'll all be positive about that. I think we'll all like that. We'll be thinking what a relief that there is a NATO member state that can bridge the gap. Now, I'll stop there. I'm sure you have questions. It's my target time is reached.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to come back to the Eastern Mediterranean and the tensions which have mounted. Even yesterday evening, we've seen from Turkey worrying messages, increasing their forces in Turkish-occupied Cyprus, I mean, I would like your take on that. How can we tone it down? Mr. Theophanous said we should tone it down. How can this happen? Right now, things are looking very worrying. Should we be worried? I mean, Cyprus is a small island in the middle of this. Could I have you take first, and then Mr. Theophanous as well?
Yeah, and thank you for the question, because I didn't really expound on playing defense. I think from the Turkish perspective, Erdogan and Mitsotakis had a gentleman's agreement, right? That Turkey was going to de-escalate tension with the United States over the S-400 purchase, which led to Turkey being banished from the F-35 program, for which Turkey had paid $1.3 billion. It's kicked out. I think Erdogan finally understood it's never getting back in. So he said, okay, I give up. I'm going to find a compromise with the US, which is we'll apply that $1.3 billion that was supposed to be for F-35s and get more of what we want, what we already have, sorry, F-16s. So he and Mitsotakis, according to Erdogan, agreed that Mitsotakis wouldn't lobby against that. But when Prime Minister Mitsotakis was in Washington, he addressed a joint session of Congress and lobbied against the sale. So Erdogan went crazy. And I think he's overreacting. He's emotional. He feels double-crossed. And his rhetoric is extreme. And it is frightening people in the neighborhood. But to answer your question, I think there's no threat to Cyprus. Erdogan's eyes are not on Cyprus. Cyprus is something to be managed. As you said, he's decided on a two-state solution. He's moved on. He's moved on, and now his foreign policy is about trying to end the war in Ukraine and then managing the mess in Syria with 3.5 million refugees and a civil war still raging. Those are his top priorities, I think.
Mr. Theophanous.
Yes, perspectives from Turkey, what you mentioned in relation to 74 being perceived as defensive. One could understand that if Turkey had stopped on the 23rd of July when junta collapsed and the putschist regime here in Cyprus also collapsed, and given a chance for an agreement based on the Zurich London agreements, okay, but that was not done. I think many historians, when they see what happened, they make a parallel of how Nazi Germany used the German minority Czechoslovakia before the Second World War to move on. Cypriots worry about Turkey as they see the hybrid war engaged in Cyprus. I mean, it's not only about Turkish Cypriots. They're on the occupied northern part, there are more settlers than Turkish Cypriots. Turkish Cypriots also feel suffocated, and that's of concern to us. Now, coming back to the issue of the European Union and the sanctions, I think one of the issues in international relations is this double standards. I understand the support for Ukraine, both the United States and European Union, but I would have been happier if the European Union had shown more sensitivity for Cyprus, which is a member state, and Ukraine is not a member state. So I think this is something which we should see. And again, with the war, it is essential that we move on to see how it can be stopped. I think it's not only Turkey who can be a mediator, I mean, for the end of the war. I think what is required, it's at some point in time, United States and Berlin and France talking with Moscow to address the issues there.
Certainly, this war seems that it's here to stay, at least for the time being. Where Turkey is concerned, it has been doing, as you said, a balancing act, which has been received positively or at least neutrally from other players or the bigger players. How long do you think it could keep this up? Because things are mounting up, you know. I think at some point, maybe Turkey will need to pick a side.
Yeah, I think it has. Again, if Turkey is providing these lethal weapons to Ukraine and condemning the invasion, it's kind of chosen sides, but I think it still will, all the way till the war is over, want to try to mediate. But I think the war is unraveling for Putin. And I was really struck today. I mean, talk about bringing things home. On the gate I was boarding my flight on was a sort of a double gate, and I was exhausted. I'd flown overnight, and I got to showing my boarding pass, and it was the wrong flight. It was to St. Petersburg, Russia. And the two guys who were in front of me in line right before, they were in their late 20s, it looked like, dirty, haggard, and totally devastated, depressed to be going back to Russia, because they know they're going to the war, and chances are they're not going to make it out. And so with this partial mobilization and conscription, Putin has finally brought the war home, right? He's brought the war to those kids and older men my age in Moscow and St. Petersburg, who had largely avoided being drawn up in the war, right? I mean, Putin is afraid of demonstrations in those cities. So the conscription has mainly been in small cities in, largely in the Far East and in central Russia. Now, the war has come home. It is hugely unpopular. So I think something is going to give on the Russian side. He cannot keep up this war much longer. He knows it domestically. And so the need for mediation will be there, and of course it needs to be bigger than just Turkey participating in the mediation. But I'm convinced there's no way the United States is going to back down and say to Ukraine, you don't have a right to fight to restore your territorial integrity. The U.S. will never do that in my mind.
It's, for Cyprus, it would be a very positive development if the West insists on the reestablishment of the territorial integrity of Ukraine, because by the same token, if this is a pillar that should be respected in Ukraine, one could put forward the position that this is a pillar that should be also respected in the Republic of Cyprus, and that we cannot have double standards. And in the need to reform the United Nations and also to reassess issues in international relations, I think it may be a step forward in upholding international law and upholding principles. So such steps would be in the right direction and would be welcome.
If we had friends here from Armenia, though, they would say the opposite. They would say, you Americans became independent of England by asserting the right of the self-determination of peoples. We want our Armenians to self-determine in Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh, Therefore, you're following a double standard, America, because you're not supporting the right of self-determination of the Armenian separatists.
By the same token, you see, I would be very happy if we take the parallel of this self-determination. I would be very happy to seeing a parallel with Kurds in Turkey, Turkish Cypriots here, and follow a consistent policy. So you cannot have here a request for an independent state and there are no minority rights. So at some point in time, we have to take it and be serious, and that's what I said at my first statement, to be statesmanship and pragmatic, and to see so that we move along in a direction where there is some consistency. And that should enhance the respectability of great powers. Because you cannot behave in this way in one particular way and in another completely the opposite. If that is the case, then we say, if that is the case, then it's the case, it's power. So the powerful country gets its way. That is okay as long as we do not talk about principles then.
Well, they're principles that have to both be taken into account. I was the mediator on the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. So the formula we came up with in 2009 that both sides agreed to in principle, but they never finalized it, was that we have to have a balance between the international legal principle of self-determination of a peoples and the international legal principle of territorial integrity. They're in conflict. Each conflict is unique, and you have to find the unique balance of those factors that will allow you to resolve a conflict. It's hard.
Okay, time is running out, so I really wanted to focus on energy now.
Great.
You're both, so energy in the Eastern Mediterranean, Ukraine conflict means there's a shortage of energy. What do you think can be done? Mr. Theophanous, you did say that we should think outside of the box.
Yes, I had, in my recent report in relation to the Cyprus question, the energy, you don't have to wait about the solution of the Cyprus question to see certain developments on the energy issue. If you could take an evolutionary process and find practical ways to utilize energy in the region and perhaps for the European Union, I think it would be mostly useful in the region. I think first step is to see where we do it. You have a de facto delimitation of the exclusive economic zone between the Republic of Cyprus and Turkey. Then you may tell me that's recognition. You just draw a line and you say that this is Cyprus and we can utilize it. And if this is done in relation with some other steps, I think there would be a lot of economic benefits and reduction of the mistrust and starting to see whether it's possible to move step by step in positive directions.
What do you think,
serving
Chris?
multiple objectives.
I think Europe's going to have a cold winter. There's not enough natural gas that'll be available to make up the 155 billion cubic meters that Russia exported last year. But Europe has determined never to buy Russian gas again. And I take them at their word. So for people like me, I've spent, the last 10 years strongly focused on helping European countries obtain non-Russian sources of natural gas. That's what I do in my business life. That's why I was in Kazakhstan yesterday. And over time, in the next couple of years, that will happen. Liquid natural gas from the United States, from Qatar is coming in large volumes. More investment is needed in Europe. It'll take longer than these few months we have till winter begins, but liquid natural gas is coming. Europe is going to consume much less gas also this winter, so they won't have as high a demand to meet. From this region, I think over time, absolutely there should be natural gas, and there is, that will be flowing to Europe in the form of Israeli gas that goes to Egypt. It's liquefied and is brought in as LNG, and Cypriot gas will do the same. I think there's commercial space for a pipeline from Israel and Cyprus to Turkey and onward to Europe. It's politically impossible now. Again, offline, I'll talk to you about ideas for years I've been pursuing on the commercial side to make that happen. And electricity. The way Cyprus can integrate its electricity into the European grid and get more base load so it can use its full potential of renewable resources is to connect to the European grid through what? Through Turkey. Turkey is connected to the European Union electricity grid, so Cyprus could de-isolate itself on electricity by coming up with an agreement with Turkey to connect then into Bulgaria and the European grid.
Is that possible, though?
Absolutely. I mean, technically, it's not difficult, but politically, I proposed this to some friends in the Cypriot parliament about 6 years ago, and one of them, her boss was speaker at the time, and she said, okay, that makes sense, but do you want my boss to commit political suicide by proposing an electricity cable from Turkey to Cyprus? So I put it to everyone here, is it possible politically?
I mean, there are certain other ideas as well, so that interests, Cypriot sensitivities and political objectives are met if there is a will. For example, I have no doubt if Turkey recognizes the sacred right of the Republic of Cyprus to exist, I think there would be a lot of steps for cooperation that would serve regional and broader interests.
I think it will, yeah.
Okay.
Two-state
So
solution.
we have 2 minutes, 1 minute each.
Sure.
Please.
Sure, okay. So, I'm not here, by the way, trying to take Turkey's side. I'm trying to explain the way Turks are looking at it. The Turkish foreign policy elite, by and large, again, has the self-image. We all have positive self-images, right? Our countries, we're on the side of good. So in Turkey, as crazy as it may sound, I think the foreign policy believes Turkey is a force for moderation and for mediation and for calming down tensions in the world. Sitting here, you think, oh my gosh, but listen to those threats from Erdogan toward Greece. Or look at what Turkey did a few years ago, 2 years ago, in the Eastern Mediterranean exploring for oil and gas. Okay, but look at this point. Since August 2020, when the Greek and Turkish naval ships collided, there has been no Turkish exploration in the Eastern Mediterranean. All of those Turkish exploration ships have been brought back. Either they're held in port or they're in the Black Sea. That is a signal by Erdogan that he wants to de-escalate. I hope he stays on that path.
Mr. Theophanous.
Yes, I wish the Turkish objective to have peace in Turkey and peace in the world and peace with all neighbors were true, but if I see around the facts is that there is trouble with Turkey with almost all its neighbors. In the case of the Republic of Cyprus, certainly Cyprus cannot be perceived as a threat to Turkey. So my understanding is that if the West shows the same, has the same objectives in relation to advancing international law and the territorial integrity of nation states and all that, then we could expect positive developments. I think so far Turkey, was tolerated for all its actions that it has done and paid no cost. I think it's important that the European Union, the United States, that at some time they take certain principles, face value, and try to implement them in a pragmatic way in all the conflict areas. And I understand this cannot be a situation overnight. It is a step-by-step approach that, if implemented, it would lead to positive developments in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Okay, so I keep, in general, an optimism that the escalation will not go much further, or at least inaction. No, here in the Eastern Mediterranean, I meant. Mr. Putin, I think, has shown so far his intentions, and I would like to thank you very much for your very valuable input.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.